All right, welcome back to the Roast It Yourself podcast, brought to you by Coffee Bean Corral and Current Crop Roasting Shop. I'm Stephen Burnett with Coffee Bean Corral in Jackson, Mississippi, and with me, as always, is Catherine Mansell, certified Q grader and director of Current Crop Roasting Shop in New Orleans, Louisiana. Catherine, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing great. This is chronologically in real time, 2 days in a row. We've
Yeah.
gotten to record in person.
Yeah.
And that is just very exciting. This is going to be 2 weeks apart, so
Right.
time travel being what it is with the internet. But yeah, it's pretty exciting.
I
I
like
can get used to this. I get used to this. You should come up here all the time. Just, yeah, every day, just be here, and then also go down there.
My favorite.
Right. Because each week we set aside about 10 minutes to field questions from home coffee roasters and professionals alike about roasting, tasting, and most importantly, enjoying coffee. You can send your questions to questions@riypod.com. That's questions@riypod.com to get a nice shout out from us in an upcoming episode, and of course to get your question answered. This week's question is from Otto, who asks, when resting coffee, what type of environment and container do you recommend? I have air-escape canisters. What do you think? My current method is to put fresh roasted coffee in the canister and release the gas every 6 to 12 hours. I don't keep the lid off. Rather, it's sealed and I manually release. Do you recommend leaving coffee in an open container to rest for the period you recommend? My understanding is if coffee beans sit in an open container or in something that is exposed to the air and to the atmosphere, the coffee will grow stale in time. Is that accurate? Or maybe that only applies to ground coffee. Thank you for your answers and advice, Otto. Otto, thank you very much for the question.
Yeah.
So what do we think? How do we, okay, maybe it's two questions. Maybe it's how do we store coffee and how should we store coffee? Maybe those are the questions.
Right.
So how should we store coffee?
Once I get finished roasting, my coffee goes into a valve bag for the entire time that I'm letting it rest. Once the coffee is fully degassed, then I put it into my air-escape container. And that's where it stays. Every morning I open it, pour some in the grinder, seal it back. I know once you finish roasting the coffee, if you just leave it out where the oxygen is getting to it, that's going to negatively affect it. But I like the idea of releasing it manually every 6 to 12 hours. If it stays really fresh and you can taste that it's really fresh, then you've got something that's working really well.
Totally.
But I love the valve bag because I can let it alone. And then as time goes on, it's releasing as it wants to release as often as possible or whenever it is ready to go. That's the way that I go about it. I know a lot of people talk about using mason jars and using all sorts of containers that are airtight, but I always leave it in the valve bag just until it's finished degassing before I put it into my container.
Yeah, and what's cool about the valve bags, from what I understand, it was they kind of invented those or used those for coffee to solve another problem, namely the bags busting in transit, because they would build up that gas and pressure inside the bag, and then the bag busts, and you've got coffee everywhere. And so they developed the valve system so that it would let that gas out and not bust in transit, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But the side benefit of that is because CO2, which is being released when we say degassing, we're talking about the CO2 that's built up in the bean from the roast, releasing into the area, the atmosphere around it. CO2 is heavier than air, which, by the way, is why you should have your CO2 alarms low to the ground as opposed to up on the ceiling. Just good safety right there.
Yeah.
But it's heavier than air, so you have your bag standing up and the valves towards the top of the bag. The CO2 being released by the beans is forcing the oxygen out. It's pushing it out as opposed to CO2 out, so you don't have the problem of oxidization nearly as much until you open the bag, and then of course all bets are off. But I think that's kind of a cool use for the automatic release. When you now with the canisters, the air-escape canisters, because you're having to do the manual release. I mean, to me, I just don't like work, and so that sounds like something I have to remember and keep up with. And I got too much going on. But if that works for you, that sounds like it would be a problem. I don't know specifically. Maybe you know. Is it a one-way valve when you release the pressure, or is it just an open? Like when you release on the air-escape, is it a one-way valve or is it both? It would have to be both ways, right? Because you're pulling it out.
You're pulling it up first, and then you're pressing it back down. So I guess it some way have to be.
It's a two-way valve.
Leave it all the way up and then press down as you go. But yeah, you're pulling it up and then
Okay.
pushing
Okay.
it back down.
Yeah. So you are running a little bit of a risk of oxidization, but again, now I alluded earlier to the fact that there's a right way of doing things, which is the way Catherine does everything, and then there's a wrong way of doing things, which is what Lazy Steven does. And so what I do is I absolutely leave the coffee exposed to the oxygen because I know I'm going to drink this coffee like before anything really bad can happen to it.
Right.
I'm just going to drink it.
Yeah.
And we go through a ton of coffee over here. We're roasting coffee all the time. And before when I was buying the coffee myself for home, I was meticulous.
Yeah.
Bean counting, absolutely. I was like how exactly measuring everything, and putting dates. I still put dates on things out of habit, but put dates on everything. I would, okay, I need to wait X number of hours, X number of days, and it's good for. And now, just because of the situation where I have to roast a lot of coffee anyway, I'm not nearly as precious with the coffee as I used to be.
Right.
But that's just laziness. That's not actually, I've not learned anything that led me to believe that. I just am like, I don't have to. But yeah, I think that's the right way. I think the one-way valve bags are really great for that medium, even to longer term storage, because especially if you don't break the seal, then there's just no oxygen or very little oxygen in the bag to break the coffee.
Keeping it closed,
Now, Anna, you mentioned whether this would apply to ground coffee only or also to whole bean, and I think that's an interesting opportunity to talk about like why coffee breaks down, why it breaks down. So when you have your green coffee, that coffee it lasts a long time, months and months and months, up to a year, really. I mean, more than that in some cases. It just depends on the bean. And this coffee has not broken down. It's not gone through the roasting process, and the roasting process really it destroys the coffee bean. We're getting something beautiful out of it, but it destroys the bean. Like you can't go plant it outside and expect anything to grow once you roast it. And so because it hasn't been broken down by intense heat, it's going to last a lot longer stored correctly than coffee that has been broken down or roasted. Whole bean coffee, and there's a lot of controversy around how long whole bean coffee is good and when you should start drinking it. All that we have episodes on that I'll link in the show notes down below. But the long and short of it is, whatever you say, whenever you should drink coffee after it's been roasted, however long it's supposed to last or whatever, it lasts a lot less long than green coffee. Why? And everyone agrees on that. Why? Because it's been broken down more. And so the oxygen in the environment can go to work on that coffee and make it stale and destroy the flavors. Ground coffee is not long for this world at all.
Once you grind it, it's losing freshness by the minute. So the way that I understand it, and somebody please correct me if I've got this wrong, but as your beans are degassing, as they're whole beans, they're fighting through the roast. So if you have a really dense light roast bean, it's taking a lot of time for that CO2 to come out. Dark roast is really brittle. CO2 comes out fairly quickly. But once you grind it, all of it's gone. It's already all the way out. So ground coffee loses freshness by the minute. So I think you can try to, if you have to grind a bunch at a time and keep it sealed, I think it'll keep it fresh for a little bit of time, but it will not be as fresh as it would have been if you kept it whole.
That's right. And that's why even, the one good thing about like your K-cup type style is if they ground it and immediately sealed it, you've captured that bit of freshness in that K-cup and until it's punctured and the water goes in, it should come out. It's a fresh way of, probably the freshest way of having pre-ground coffee for a month and a half ago. Right.
Yeah.
So that's a real thing. But once you open, I used to tell people, once you open the bag, your big bag of ground coffee, and you smell that wonderful stuff there, it just went. It's all evaporated. It's gone. There it went. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So we recommend, especially if you're roasting coffee, please get a grinder. I tell people to get into good coffee, buy good beans, buy a grinder. That's the easiest way. You don't have to buy a fancy machine. You don't have to learn pour over technique. Those two things right there, grind it right before you, good coffee, ground right before you brew it. Even if you brew it in a suboptimal way, man,
so much better.
Leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
Leaps and bounds.
Night and day. Truly.
Night and day.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. Now you mentioned something, and I want to get on this. You said that when your method is in the valve bag until the degassing process is finished. How do you judge that? Is it a time thing? Is it Are there signs you look for? How do you judge when the degassing process is at least mostly finished and you can move it to?
By my roast level.
Mm-hmm.
Light roast, I leave in there at least 8 to 10 days. Medium roast, I leave in there 6 to 7 days, 8, 9 days,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, depending on if it's on the lighter side or the darker
Mm-hmm.
side of medium. So it's really time wise. And once that time is over, the first thing I do is grind some and make a pot of it. Mm-hmm. And once I know that it's where it should be or where I want it to be, that's when it goes in the air skate.
There's a lot of information, and I think that's where the where most of the coffee wisdom is right now, is that it's not great to have coffee right after you roast it.
Right.
There are some people that are like, man, I went to Ethiopia and they roasted the coffee right in front of me in a big bowl, and then they ground it and brewed the best coffee I ever had.
Yeah.
And that's great, and that's going to be its own thing. That's an experience in itself, right? But I think objectively we could say that, and this is from a coffee tasting standpoint, the flavors just aren't as obvious or present when you first roasted coffee or the next day as they will be after the coffee has a chance to degas. And so, Otto, you're doing the right thing by degassing that coffee. Yeah. And the last thing I'll say, I've been very chatty. Sorry, guys. Sorry, you didn't watch for me. You're watching for us, and I'm just taking over. But I have many things to say about this.
Yes.
And I went at SCA Houston. They had poster presentations, and I don't read a lot of scientific journals, posters, things like that. But I was interested, and I went through and I chatted with somebody that was doing. They had one on coffee storage, and the idea was, if you can figure out where in the life cycle of a coffee, based on roast level, as you're saying, that the coffee is at peak flavor, measure how much CO2 is in that coffee at the point of peak flavor, and then inject into the bag a certain amount of CO2 to basically make it to where there's equilibrium and the CO2 does not leak out of the bean because there's already some in the bag. You will arrest the coffee development right there and keep it at peak until, of course, the bag is open.
Wow.
Which I thought was just so cool and completely, beyond me, both in my understanding of it and in my ability to actually execute if I did. I thought it was cool, right? It's like, okay, put the same amount of CO2 out in the bag as you've got in the coffee, and there's nowhere for it to go. And so it just stays there, and it's just frozen in time. To me, I'm like, if we could do that with coffee, get that to where it's mainstream, and then you could say, I've got a bag of the 2025 Ethiopia Yirgacheffe from 15 years ago, and it's still good, and it's still like, man, wouldn't that be okay? So Otto, there are many good things happening in coffee storage. You're on the right track, and excited for you on this. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. And honestly, those valve bags, they're reusable. Yeah, you don't have to buy a bunch of valve bags. You can buy a pack, put your coffee in there, seal it up. You don't have to even heat seal it. You can just seal it with the zipper. Yeah. And let it sit for however long Catherine said do, or whatever works for you, and then move it to your airscape and use that for your dispense your coffee, that kind of thing. So do that. We have those. I'll put a link to valve packs. We have those, so I'll put that in there too. All right. Well, Catherine, do you think that we said? I think I forgot to say this yesterday, but do you think that we said everything there is to say about coffee storage?
No.
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 Man, one day we will actually say everything there is to say about some subject. But until then, it's up to you, dear listener, to correct us and to throw in your own perspective on these things. Tell us what you do differently, what your method is, how you tell when the coffee is finished degassing. Is it a time thing? Is it a calendar thing? Is it a roast level thing? Do you just, like the Ethiopian people, roast the coffee right there in a big pot and then drink it immediately? If you do that and tell us it's the best in the world, please drop that in the show notes. Or drop that in the comments and let us know. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we do, which is not possible, but we hope that because we enjoy making this thing a ton. It's a lot of fun. Yes. And we're excited to watch the Roast It Yourself podcast continue to grow and take over the world, reach more and more people, and get people into coffee roasting. If you look at the comments on YouTube, people are saying, I bought my first roaster, I bought this roaster, I'm getting into coffee roasting. And it's just because they realized it can be done, and it's not that hard. That's why we're doing this. And so y'all sharing this and spreading it around is making that happen. And so we love that. We love that. We could not do this without our coworkers, the folks that enable us to take the time to sit here, have these conversations, and also edit the video, edit the audio, do the graphical work, and make us look and sound with everything. You could not do it without you guys. We appreciate it. Remember, listener, you can, and viewer, You can send your questions, anything you have at all about coffee, roasting, tasting, or enjoying, anything to do with it, to questions@riypod.com. Otherwise, have a great day and happy roasting.
Thanks, Otto.